Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Life Talks. Today I have Tony Davis on. He is a NASM certified personal trainer, nutrition coach, and more specifically has gotten into neurotyping. He is one of the hosts of Bearded Barbell podcast. It's available on Apple, Google, Amazon, Spotify, and Anchor. Tony, thanks for joining me, brother.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me.
Hey, so I really wanted to start, actually, we met at grounding camp through Elliot Hulse. So I think that's definitely, a great place to start, because maybe if you could start by what made you go to grounding camp? And for those who are not aware of it, what was it to you?
So it's actually somewhat of an interesting story with how I wound up at that grounding camp, because I wasn't supposed to be at that one. I was supposed to be at the Australia one that was before it, and it got canceled because of everything that shut the world down. So they canceled that one, and then they announced the one in Florida. So right away, I messaged Elliot and I messaged Colleen. I was like, hey, is there any way I can just have my ticket moved over to that event? And they were like, sure. So they moved me over. And then that's how I wound up actually probably better, because I met you and I met everybody else that was there. And really, it's a lot easier to connect and stay connected with people on this side of the world, because just time zone difference and all that.
Yeah, for sure.
But really, just my path to grounding camp was overall an interesting one. I think there was one in LA a couple years ago that I told myself I wanted to go to, but I took zero action to actually making it happen. And so it passed. I got pissed at myself because I was like, how could I let that go? Because it was close by. That's why I wanted to go. It was, 2 states away. I'm in New Mexico. That was in California. So it would have been super easy. So I had one of those moments where I just looked at myself and I was like, cool, well, the next one that comes up, no matter where it is, I'm going. And this was before they announced where it was, but I just made that decision. I was like, cool, it's going to be somewhere in the country. I'm just going to buy a round trip ticket to New York, Texas, whatever it was, just go there and have the experience. And then I felt like the universe was kind of testing me. I was like, all right, cool. You said that. The next one's in Australia. Now what are you going to do? And I was like, all right, cool. Here we go. Bought my ticket to the grounding camp in Australia. Didn't buy a flight ticket yet. And then, like I mentioned before, COVID shut everything down. So I was like, all right, well, I showed up. Grounding camp didn't show up, at least on the universal aspect, but then it got, re-announced for Florida. So I was like, cool, well, now I'm going to that one.
Yeah. And what made you, what did you learn from going to grounding camp? And I'll just speak for me. I mean, what I learned by going, one of the greatest things that they did was making your yeses yes and your no's no's, the first exercise that was done.
Yeah.
Because for me, what I've learned is in all of this chaos, all the political corruption, all the things that I'm not even going to go into, we all know how corrupt our society's become, morals, all that. Was one of the things that's lacking is a value structure. It's the ability to say no to things that are wrong and yes to the things that are right, and make those true without making the other person wrong. You are owning your yeses, you're owning your no's. What was the thing that really impacted you by going to that grounding camp?
I came out of grounding camp being able to actually set and hold boundaries. So that was always my huge issue throughout life. I was always just kind of going along with the breeze, and wherever it took me, I just followed blindly. And I just kind of said, all right, this is where I am now. And then I moved over here and it was like, cool, this is where I am now. And so really starting with, that yes and no exercise that we did. And then when we did we did the war exercise and all the bioenergetic meditation we did, it made me comfortable with being able to say yes, which builds a boundary, and also no, which then also reinforces a boundary. And then it got me comfortable within that sphere of yes, being able to focus on something and then start attacking it, start going after it. And that's from there where everything started snowballing, with me diving into coaching and personal training and all of that.
Yeah, let's go into that too. I mean, bioenergetics is huge. Moving your body, it's so important in the world where we're just not moving, desk jobs and, people driving. What, maybe if you could share a little bit for people who don't know you, what got you into personal training, nutrition, and I'm definitely interested in neurotyping. We spoke a little bit earlier before about that. So
for sure. So let's start off with, so I'm 37 now. When I really got into strength training was about 12 years ago. So right about 25, I had just gotten into professional wrestling at the same time. Now, when I got into professional wrestling, I was still about 135 pounds and I'm 5'11". So was a very tall, very wiry frame.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, I was always hurt. I was always bruised. I was always limping. Something was always sore. And I'd already tried putting on some strength and size 2 or 3 times by then, between like high school classes and just times after school, and it just wasn't working. And this was actually about the time I discovered Elliot Hulse. He introduced me to powerlifting and he introduced me to strongman. So back then I just, I went to the Google machine and I typed in strongman gyms in New Mexico, and I found one that happened to be 3 miles away. But it was a small gym. So I went, checked it out. I walked in and I looked over to the right and I just saw a row of Atlas stones. And I was like, cool, I'm sold. This is the place. The owner still gave me the whole tour. And the whole time I'm like, I don't care about the rest. I was like, you have Atlas stones, I'm sold. I'll figure everything else out on the way. So that is how I got into strength training in general. So I did that for a few years and that helped. That gave me the initial pulse, the initial push of, cool, let's get strong, let's get jacked, let's get shredded, all that stuff, right? That's where most health journeys, fitness journeys start, is in that physical sense. Fast forwarding to about 2017, 2018, I was still professional wrestling, but I moved to Florida to go to a professional wrestling school there. And at the time I was very like just one speed, right? 100 miles an hour, dead straight ahead. So I was always either in the gym or at school or at work to pay for school or the gym. And my diet went to absolute crap. Like I was going, when I would get out of work, I would go to the Wendy's on the way home. I'd get just this bag of food, take it home, devour it, go to sleep, repeat the next day. Shocking. A few months after that, everything just started falling apart. I started feeling terrible. I really got to a point where I didn't want to be there anymore. And so I reached out. I started working with a therapist for a few months. And in the spring of 2018, so that's about 4 years now, I got diagnosed with bipolar 2, which is, it's a mix of depression with manic episodes, so highs and lows. What separates bipolar from bipolar 2 is the highs aren't as high, but there's still that marked difference in mood and that shift, right? And so worked with a therapist through that, and it actually got so bad depression wise that I decided I just needed an entire break from life. And for me, that looked like me just stopping everything. So I stopped wrestling, stopped lifting, packed everything up, and I went to Australia for 5 months. And I was like, cool, I need to get out of the country. Don't know any other languages, so that helps narrow down my choices. And I don't want to go anywhere where it's cold because I don't like the cold as much. So that knocks off all of Europe, and that left Australia. So easy choice there. So 5 months there, which was good because it gave me that opportunity to disconnect from everything, right? That was potential triggers for any sort of depression or mania or anything like that. So I got to disconnect from that. And I was naive back then. And I thought, cool, I got rid of everything. I'm good to go back to the States now. I can go and just jump right back in, right? No, it's not how it works. But that gave me the opportunity to then go, oh, this works for me. This doesn't work for me. So I can get rid of that and focus more on that. And one of the things I started focusing on when I got back from Australia was overall food quality. And I know Elliot has always been all about food quality and eating better foods, eating whole foods, organic and all that. I was the young, dumb kid that was like, it's not that important, that sort of thing. Turns out he was right. Shocker. It's super important. And so when I started focusing on nutrition and I started focusing on more restorative and more energizing movements with the body, with exercise, that's when I started noticing how much better it helped me be able to manage my moods and how much more balanced everything was all the time. And this is around the time I started getting the idea of personal training and nutrition coaching, because I started realizing, oh, wow, cool. I'm starting to figure this out for myself. Then that light bulb comes in my head that goes, well, how many other people are dealing with something similar? Maybe not bipolar 2, but how many people are dealing with anxiety or dealing with depression or dealing with imposter syndrome or people pleasing, anything like that.
Sure.
And, we talked about a lot of those things at grounding camp, and we
Yeah.
talked about how bioenergetic meditation could be a vehicle for essentially spending that energy and working our way through it. And so that's how I started making the shift towards personal training and nutrition coaching, to try to help people build a better relationship with exercise, a better relationship with food, to help actually support ourselves, rather than, that typical like bro mentality behind exercise, where it's like, no pain, no gain. And
Yeah.
if you can walk up the stairs the next day, your workout was a failure. Like none of that at all, right? It's about using exercise to enhance your quality of life.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And going into bioenergetics, you're talking about the bipolar. I honestly, and this is just me, but I really think it's very true. I think in an age of ADHD and bipolar and all of these things, depression, anxiety, they're so, I think, interlinked with bioenergetics. You go to a doctor, and not to say that the doctor can't help you, I'm sure your therapist help you, but I think a lot of it is just not knowing. No one taught us how to deal with our energy. When we're a
Right.
kid, I mean, for me, I was diagnosed with ADHD. When I get older, as I've gotten older, I've just kind of looked at that as BS. And it's like, I was never taught on how to really express my energy.
Mm-hmm.
So if I would express it, it would be like too much to the world. And then it would be like, this shame and guilt. Oh, you can't be like that. Or boxed institutions in school. So I think that's really, it's really something that's important, and it's very hard to really teach that. And going into being aware of the thoughts too. You have a quote that was here. The more precisely you define the problem, the more easily you can find a solution. I feel bad can have a million causes. I didn't sleep much last night and I haven't exercised in a week has a very straightforward answer. So like, being able to define the problem is very important, but I think it's hard tying into the bioenergetics. It's like, think about all the thoughts we have throughout, the facts that we have our thoughts from our parents, our society, and then we normalize what certain things are, and then these develop into emotions, and then we express those emotions differently. But being able to narrow it down, I think when you were saying you went to Australia, that was a time for you. Like I always talk about contraction and expansion. It's a contract. It's great to be in those contracting when you
Oh yeah.
you're reflecting, you're self-reflecting. Where am I off? Why am I not? Where's my navigation system off? So, and then going back into that expression. But branching off what you had just said, nutrition. So if we can dive into that, what were the things that you changed in your life that dramatically made differences?
So I'd always been the macro counter guy, right? Like I would always have like, cool, this is my protein, this is my
Yeah.
carbs, this is my fat for the day. And to a degree, I'm still that person. Like I'm personally a data nerd. So if I can just put numbers to things that I can plug in, it makes me happier. So I still do that. But the big changes that I made were around food quality. So I stopped going to Wendy's. I stopped going to, McDonald's, or I really stopped going to most fast food places. There's still a small place for them in my diet, just if life gets a little too hectic and I'm like, cool, I have to eat something. But I make it a rule for myself never to do it twice in a row. So if I go to Wendy's for lunch, for example, the next meal cannot be fast food, and it has to be something much better, basically to prevent myself from getting back on that habit. So I just cut it off before it has a chance to rebuild, right? So it's a lot of cooking at home. It's a lot of meat. It's a lot of whole grains. It's stuff that comes not prepackaged in boxes, not pre-frozen or anything like that. It's meat, it's rice, potatoes, veggies, fruit, tons of water, a lot of water now.
What do you think of people who are vegan and vegetarianism? Because I keep seeing this like conflict, and I hate to see that conflict, but let's have confrontation on it, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that there's a lot of good points on both sides. What would you say to someone who's like, no, you shouldn't eat meat? And as someone who I eat meat, I'm definitely more interested in like, the understanding behind it. I lean more towards, let's try to have sustainable approaches. I mean, the factory farms and all that probably doesn't have a great impact, but
Yeah.
I don't think, I can't say for sure. You can't just get rid of meat either. I think there seems to
Right.
be, but because there's still a conflict in both of these worlds, I think there needs to be more discussion on it. What are your thoughts on the?
So this is one of the things I learned about myself in Australia, which is I tend to reverse think a lot of things. And we can get deeper into that when we hit neurotyping, because it
Yeah.
connects to how I fell into that as well. So as an example, when I was learning how to handle my depression, my bipolar, all of that, they always say that depression is caused by a chemical imbalance, right? And so the way my brain works is I'm like, okay, cool, but do we know that? Like, are we sure that it's not the other way? Are we sure that the chemical imbalance doesn't cause the depression? And so that's what led me down the path of like, cool, are there ways and things I can do to affect that chemical balance, which is where nutrition comes in. And then down the road, when we hit neurotyping, we talk about how that connects to that as well. Um, but I think, back to, vegan vegetarianism versus meat eating, we fall into this place in society, and I think politics and COVID and all that has just made it worse, where everything is now either or. You're either red or you're blue. You're either carnivore or you're a vegan. You either believe the earth is flat or never mind.
Yeah.
But overall, I think there's a lot of space for both in a lot of those situations, right? Like there's definitely a lot of merit from eating meat. There's also a lot of merit from eating vegans, not necessarily vegan, but just having plants, veggies, fruit in your diet.
Yeah.
They both bring merit. So really the solution on that front to me isn't either or, it's a little bit of both, right? So obviously there are things in meat that you can't get from plants. There are, like a ton of the different B vitamins that you can't find in plants. The iron that we get from meat, we digest a lot easier. Obviously there's way more protein in meat. There's creatine in red meat, and that stuff just doesn't exist in plants. Plants also have vitamin C, they have vitamin K, and a few other things, which typically is not found in meat unless you're also eating organ meat to basically get those same nutrients.
Makes me think of Liver King.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, liver
Yeah.
meat, stomach lining, all that stuff. And I mean, now the cool thing now is it's a lot easier to stick with the vegan diet and still be healthy. You just have to plan a lot more, right? Like if you're eating meat, it's easy to figure out, well, where am I going to get everything I need from protein, all the, amino acids and all that. It's like, just eat a steak, you're covered, right? You don't even have to think about it. It's not quite that easy with vegan sources because a lot of them are not as complete. They're usually missing some amino acids that we need because our bodies can't make them. So they have to come from diet. But in the past few years, as they've gotten better with things like pea protein and other vegan supplements, they're working on filling those holes. So it's a lot easier to plan your vegan diet and still be successful, still be healthy. But again, it just takes that higher degree of planning and more forethought as you set out on that.
Yeah. Well, shifting gears a little bit, let's go into neurotyping because
Let's do it.
I feel like your face lights up when you talk about that. I'm definitely interested in that as well. I mean, so it's basically from what you said, it's like a personality test for weightlifting.
Yeah. So it's centered around both training and nutrition. So the way it works is the concept is based off of our neurotransmitters in our brain, right? So things like dopamine, adrenaline, serotonin, GABA, and we use the personality test to estimate where those levels are in our body. So as an example, you get divided into 5 different groups. There's a 1A, a 1B, a 2A, a 2B, and a type 3. And those types just illustrate different presumed levels of those neurotransmitters. So we all know somebody that's super, super confident. They're super, not necessarily loud, but they're forward with their opinions. They don't really care too much about what other people think of them, right? We can think of like Robert Downey Jr. We can think of Elliot Hulse,
Sure.
Joe Rogan. Typically, they're going to be people that have higher than normal adrenaline levels, because when you have high levels of adrenaline, you are, you feel like that more alpha version of yourself. You're more likely to speak your mind, and you're more likely to be more confident, more grounded in yourself. As another example, if we look to serotonin levels or serotonin is that neurotransmitter that helps our mood balance itself out. So it helps us kind of relax later in the day. It helps us get to sleep a little easier. When our levels are low, that's when we start having those rampant thoughts. That's when we start having thoughts that we feel like we can't control. Your mind's going a million miles a minute. You have trouble sleeping. That's where anxiety starts to creep in. And then when it's high, that's it. Basically, it's the opposite side of that. You can start to relax easier. You can fall asleep. You have more control over where your mind's going about the thoughts that are coming. They're coming maybe at a slower pace, so you can address them. And so it takes that concept and then it mixes it with the fact that the way that we eat can actually influence those levels of neurotransmitters because most of them are produced in our gut. So as an example, if we go to serotonin, so serotonin comes from the amino acid tryptophan. So if anybody's ever been at a Thanksgiving, everybody knows tryptophan because they talk about it from turkey. So tryptophan is basically one piece of the puzzle to create serotonin in the body, in the gut. So if you don't have enough tryptophan, you're not going to make enough serotonin. Now, most people, at least most Americans, typically we're under consuming protein. So right off the bat, we're now taking a hit on that serotonin production, right? And then we have the general stress of life between looking at everything in the news, everything stressing us out at work, at home, that takes a hit as well. That gives us more thoughts to basically help deplete those serotonin levels even more. This is the funniest part. Most diet advice talks about reducing carbs, cutting carbs. Carbs are bad.
Yeah.
Don't have carbs, right?
Yep.
Carbs are the other piece of the puzzle for serotonin. If you don't have carbs in your diet, your gut cannot make serotonin. So now you're making it even worse.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you need both. So you need protein. So you have your tryptophan and then everything else protein does for us: hair growth, muscle growth, skin support, nails, everything like that.
Serotonin is linked with all those?
Well, serotonin is linked with just mood balancing and everything like that, but we need the tryptophan from the protein, and then protein also does all those other things as well.
Correct. Okay.
There's also another amino acid, tyrosine, which goes towards dopamine support, which is another neurotransmitter. So there's two neurotransmitters at least that take a negative hit if you don't have enough protein and if you don't have quality protein. And so then, you have your tryptophan, you mix it with your carbs. The gut does its wonderful thing that it does, and it just creates serotonin. 95% of it comes from the gut right away. And that's what allows the brain to work at a more balanced pace. That's what allows it to not get so taken over by rampant thoughts that just seem to come out of nowhere. It can't seem to go away no matter how much we try. So that's basically how neurotyping is as a foundational piece. So it uses your nutrition to help optimize our normal neurotransmitter levels between, like I mentioned, serotonin, adrenaline, dopamine, and a couple others.
So how does someone identify where they're at in that scale? Like, is there a test that people could take? I mean, they just type in neurotyping online, and then like, where does someone start on that journey of neurotyping?
Yeah, so I actually have the test set up on my website.
Okay. Yeah, plug it and then plug it again at the end.
It's 100% free, so there's not even a space for like any sort of payment or anything like that, but it's just liftingwithtony.com/neurotype. It'll take you to the test. It's about 15 minutes.
Let me bring it up right now. Say that again. It's Lifting with Tony.
Yeah, liftingwithtony.com/neurotype.
Share my screen here. Just make sure you can see it on your end.
Perfect. Yep, that is exactly it.
Okay.
So yeah, you run there and you can take the test, and it's about 100 questions. Like I mentioned, it's about 15 minutes. But if you've ever taken any type of personality test, like the Myers-Briggs, or there's that 5 love languages test, a lot of these questions are going to be similar in how they sound and how they feel. But it gauges the way that you would respond to different situations, between like how well it describes you or if it's just completely off. It tallies everything up at the end and it gives you a score. And then it gives you, based on that score, that then predicts roughly what type you're going to fall into. And so from there, within each of those 5 types I mentioned, there's a different way to structure both your nutrition and your training to better optimize and work within that neurotype.
Yeah, that's awesome, dude. I really like how that's set up.
Yeah. And really the big key there is I think a lot of people can relate to trying things with their body to get it to change, to either get it to get bigger, to get stronger, or to get it to lean out. And we always feel like we're fighting it, right? Like we're trying to work against our body to get it to do what we want it to do rather than what it wants to do. So neurotyping gives us that information piece that then says, oh, this is how you work. Okay, cool. Let's work within how you work and still get to what I want.
So interesting. So it's like based on how you think is going to be based on how different 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 nutrition types will be needed in line with that.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's interesting. Now, where do you stand on supplementation? Now, so for people who are, they're whatever their diet is, where's your view on supplementation? Because in the world of just take this pill and everything will be okay, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I really do think supplementation is an important part. What's your view on supplementation?
So I think as much as possible, we should be getting most of our nutrition from whole natural foods. That said, there is still a place for supplementation, but like the name says, it's a supplement, it's not a replacement. So as best as you can, you should be trying to check all those nutrition boxes on your own first. So, as an example, if you're going to the gym, you're probably taking some sort of protein supplement, because for most people, trying to get very high amounts of protein can be difficult, and protein supplements help fill that gap. So that's awesome. Definitely do that. When you get to a place where all of your protein is now coming from shakes and powders, that's a time to step back and go, all right, cool. Let's see if we can actually reassess what we're doing and make that better. Like, where can we add in some eggs or some steak or some chicken just to get some real natural foods? And the reason that I have that view is, we've really only been studying the human metabolism for a few decades. That's not very long
Yeah.
in a scientific sense. So we may have identified that if we're trying to build a stronger body, if we're trying to build muscle, we need protein. Okay, we've seen that as pretty much true at this point. However, we don't know if maybe there's something else in stake that we just haven't identified yet that may also help make building muscle easier. Or, same with chicken and the same with eggs. Like, we can dive into those and we see like, cool, eggs also have potassium, they have choline, they have all these other vitamins and minerals, but there may still be something in there that we haven't identified, or something that we have identified, but we just don't know that it also plays a part in that process.
Yeah.
And so that's generally why I stick to more whole foods, but you can have supplements on the top of everything if you just need that last little push.
I subscribe to the same philosophy. I think that, it's definitely, for that last little push, is very, very important, especially, and I wanted to ask, branching off on supplements, you see, and I've just been thinking about this. I wanted to ask it is, the idea with melatonin, like that's the biggest thing. We can talk maybe a little bit about sleeping while we're on this.
Yeah.
But melatonin, this is just something I've been reflecting on, because I feel like there's a lot of inner knowledge. We're always like looking for the experts, but sometimes if we just, like you are in that contracted state in Australia, just like, we know deep down, just get connected with yourself. And, of course, it doesn't mean you're all the answers within, you shouldn't listen to experts, there's a plenty of information. But
again,
I think
it's that both instead of either or, right?
Yeah, because like melatonin is, for me, is the perfect example, because it's just like, what do I think? And I think that melatonin, I think it might have its place, but like, I think that's something like, if we're taking melatonin every night from an external source, our body doesn't naturally create it. So now we're shutting off melatonin. Now, this I didn't read anywhere. I'm just thinking, like, for myself, like, what makes sense to me, right? I think we shut down melatonin production, and then maybe what screws up our sleep patterns, and then we become dependent on a lot of these products. What is your thoughts on melatonin? And I'm sure it'd be similar to what you just said. It should be something on top, maybe, if you need it. But what's your view on melatonin? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So I want to talk about melatonin, and I'm going to bring caffeine in because I think they work on the back end in a real similar way. And I'll explain how as we go on. So when we look at melatonin, we're obviously taking it to try to help sleep better, to try to get to sleep, right? So, and it can work. But just like how we use caffeine in the morning to wake up, what eventually happens with people that are chronic coffee drinkers? 1 cup doesn't work as well anymore. Now you need 2. 2 cups doesn't work anymore. Now you need 3, and it keeps going and it keeps going. Melatonin can be the same way. So you can start off taking, 1 or 2 milligrams. Eventually, 1, your body adapts. 2, your body stops making its own melatonin. So now you need 3, 4, or 5. So you take that for a while. That doesn't work. So now you're moving up to these, these 10 milligrams slow release tablets to get you to produce melatonin throughout the night, because now you're taking so much, your body's like, all right, well, if you're supplying it, I don't really need to make more. So again, definitely melatonin has a place, but on the top. But in this situation, we now have to dial it back and go, well, on the top of what? Because melatonin doesn't necessarily, we're not trying to get it to sit on top of our own melatonin production. We're trying to get it to fill the fact that our body, for whatever reason, is not making enough. So then we have to ask, if you're really digging into it, you ask, why is my body not making enough melatonin now? Because it's, for most people, probably wasn't always an issue. So now we look at things, other things that we know that we've seen from experts, such as if you don't have a sleep routine, if you're just, up running around, cleaning, doing all sorts of high activity things, and then you just go lay down and you think you're going to go right to sleep, that's not the way the body works. The body needs to wind down, just like the body needs to warm up in the morning. If you are, we're seeing all this research coming out about blue light from screens.
Yeah.
Or, TVs, smartphones, computers. If you're looking at a computer or you're watching, a high action movie right before bed, you're going to have trouble going to sleep, because those emotions that you're feeling and that exposure to that blue light is going to be reducing your melatonin production. So it takes a while for that to ramp up in the body before you can go to sleep. So when we look at melatonin and we go, let's add more, that's okay. But would it be better to add more melatonin, or would it be better to subtract some of the things that are impacting your melatonin production? So if we know blue light's an issue, okay, we can, there are options for how to deal with that. We can reduce the time we spend in front of screens at night. We can reduce bright, harsh lights. Like I have this ring light, it's white. So obviously past, 3 o'clock, that's not going to be on anymore, because I don't want it to affect how I go to sleep tonight. There are glasses you can buy that block blue light as well. So you can look into those if, for whatever reason, getting off those screens that early is not reasonable for you. Like if that's how you work, if that's just a part of your life, you can use those glasses. They reduce blue light hitting your eyes, and they allow that melatonin production to naturally return.
Yeah. Yeah. And what would you recommend for as far as length of sleep? I know it's different ranges for different people, but like, is the 8-hour rule good, or is it just too different for different people, or what are your thoughts?
I think most people seem to do well around 7 to 9. So if it really, and again, this is where the variance comes into play, but it depends on how active you are, and it depends on how much stress you put yourself through. So if if you're very active, like if you're a construction worker, anything like that, if you're always moving, if you are constantly pushing your body, if you're constantly stressing yourself out, you're probably going to need closer to that 9-hour mark of sleep. If you've got a generally very laid back lifestyle, there's not a whole lot of stress, you're not doing a ton of physical activity, you probably get by just fine closer to that 7 mark.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what you said before is really true. It's like you're watching a high action movie before bed. It's like that emotional state going back in. When you go to sleep, it's going to be like, you're going to carry that on. Might be stress in the next morning. You're not even realizing it, in the moment. What are some of the things that you do as far as like stress management? Like, do you meditate, and like, what is, how do you deal with it? Because like you have a quote on your Facebook that you said, do not get addicted to escaping. Face your shit, handle your business, and triumph. No battle was ever won by people who run. And it might have been something that you just tagged from somebody else, but I think like what matters is that that's aligned with your values. Otherwise, you would have posted it. And I
Right.
saw that because that's aligned with my values. the idea, and I think, maybe we could shift a little bit going into like masculinity, because that to me is something that's like totally, toxic masculinity now to me is
Right.
complete bullshit, or it's misunderstood. The for men to be men, and that to me is a very masculine thing, right? Handle your shit, right?
Mhm.
But at the same time, like you were saying earlier in the conversation, it's not like, this idea of no pain, no gain. And it's like, handle your shit, be a man. And it's just like, it's like not real. It's kind of just like this, it's like this tough guy bullshit.
Yeah.
So versus how do you, to me, I'm shifting into more of being a peaceful warrior, and
Mhm.
the idea of be at peace, right? But be able to handle your shit and stick up for yourself, confront, call out bullshit, call out your own bullshit, first of all. So, how do you tie those both in? Because pushing your body to to that sweet spot where you're growing, you're confronting that weak mind every workout, but you're also being at peace, where it's like that, having that self-love and that calm energy.
Yeah. So, in, as far as meditation goes, and how I manage stress, I tried for years to do the sitting meditations and all those sorts of things. The more, I guess you could say, the yin side of meditation, right? Where you're sitting, you're in a relaxing pose, and you're just trying to relax your body, relax your mind. Um, if you mentioned ADHD earlier, so you might actually resonate with this. That doesn't work for me. Like, I get maybe like 45 seconds in, and I'm like, all right, I have to go do something now.
Yeah.
So I learned, and this is something I picked up from grounding camp as well. Cool, let's just find something to do that maybe doesn't really have necessarily a very forward goal, like active meditation, right? All the
Yeah. Like just
bioenergetics we
shaking your
did, like
body. Yeah.
we had that morning flow, we had that evening flow. They were very different, but both very physical. And so for me, lifting has become something that's meditative for me, because it's a place where I go where I can shut the world out. Because when I'm there, it's just me and the weight. It's just me, which basically means it's just me, because the weight's not talking to me. It's not really giving me any feedback other than you're either strong enough to move this or you're not. So that's very black and white. So anything else that's going on, any mental conversations, anything like that, that's all me. So that gives me a space where I'm cut off from the world. And so now it's just me. So now I can move to a place where I can start working on confronting everything. And it puts me in a place where I can have a more focused conversation with those thoughts and with those energies, and figure out, okay, how can I either work through this or work it to my advantage? Because there are certain, a lot of things still have advantages, even if they're perceived by society to be bad. Like anxiety, for instance, most
Yeah.
people think it's bad, and they don't want anything to do with their anxiety. They want to just put it in a box, throw it in the ocean,
Bro,
hope it
that is so
sinks.
true, man. You talk about your depression. My shit was porn. I was stuck in porn for so long. And like now that I'm in a place where just like anytime when I stopped it like completely, and I'm at that point where it's completely like it doesn't have that power, but those triggers are still there.
Mhm.
It's like when I see those triggers, it's like to your point, that anxiety comes up and it's like, where are the triggers? Oh, you're not good enough. Or these thoughts that pop up where it's just like, oh, you need validation from the world. You need to escape. And it's uncomfortable. But it's
Mhm.
like, as I go through that, it's like another form of training. As I'm going through that pain, it's fake pain. It's like it's burning off of the false bullshit I've told myself or that I got from the world. And that's like a burn. So I completely agree with that. But that's hard in
Yeah.
our world because it's like any sort of anxiety. Well, I need to go on this app to get,
Right.
attention. I have
I
to
need to
get
distract
this.
myself. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
And we're in a society where that's what you get applauded for. Not directly, right? Like,
Yeah.
nobody's out there like, oh, hey, congratulations on successfully avoiding your anxiety
Yeah.
today. But where we have these apps, they're designed to steal our attention. Like, everybody knows that social media, Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff, they're there, and they were designed to keep us on those platforms as long as possible, right? That's how all their algorithms work, is they feed us what we want to see to keep us to stay there. And so we learn subconsciously, that if we are feeling anxious, if we're feeling like our brains are going out of control, like we just need something to focus on, we just reach for the phone, because now everybody's got it in their pocket, right? So We have that. We learned that, oh, if you're feeling anxious, just have a drink. It'll take the edge off. We learned that, oh, if you had a bad night of sleep, don't worry about fixing your sleep pattern. Just have coffee in the morning. We learn, just take this drug, just take that drug, fix your problems that way with some external means, rather than addressing it in what's honestly going to be a harder path, right? Because that's the other reason that all these things take hold, is because they're easy fixes. And then when they don't work anymore, you just reach for more. If you're still tired after that first cup of coffee, just grab a second one. There's still coffee in the break room. Easy, right? Um,
And I think on that, I think it's really just hard at first. I mean, at least that's what I've learned is like when you implement systems and you're consistently training, you
mhm,
know, you would post it. So I don't remember the exact thing. It was about deadlifts, you know, like deadlift doing that. It's not going to happen overnight. Essentially was the core of the post, that it's going to suck. But at a certain point, at least what I've learned, it's like any skill that you develop, you get into that flow state. So
mhm.
at first it's like, it's, you know, lifting weights, you're going to be sore. It's going to be painful. It's going to be grueling. You're not going to want to go. But at a certain point, I'm sure you know, because being in that personal trainer field, it's like you start to just love it. And it's like,
Yeah.
the reverse happens where it's like, I need to work out. It's like, I
Mhm.
love to work
Yeah.
out versus I have to work out.
Yeah. It's almost like a weird test in a way from the body. Or it's like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
You really want to do this? Let's put you through the gauntlet first. We're going to hit you with soreness. We're going to make you feel like you're not quite strong enough to do what you want to do. And then if you push yourself, if you can get through it, now we can really have some fun. But yeah, I think there's that. And then really when it comes to most big shifts that we make, most big changes that we make in our lives, there's also that social aspect where if you're somebody that typically doesn't value health, doesn't value fitness, doesn't value strength, the odds are you're going to be hanging around with other people that also don't value those things. That's just, you hang around what you value, just point blank, right?
Yeah.
And so when you get to a point where you're like, all right, I think I want to make this change, now you're going to come by all of this external resistance from everybody that you're around because they don't want to. So now if you're a coffee drinker and you decide I'm going to cut back on my caffeine, now you're going to have that resistance from everybody else. It's like, well, you can just have another cup, or it's fine. It's not that big a deal or anything like that. Coffee, alcohol is another example, health, obviously. So that's something else that can add to that resistance that we all face when we start making changes in our lives.
Yeah, big time. That's still something I've definitely realized too. Like when you're on that path, it's just like it's being able to filter out your network, you know, and
Mhm.
and not having resentment too. Because I think it's very easy to get into that place, at least, you know, in my experience, where it's just like you start changing. It's like you want everybody else to change on your level, but it's like, no, you're ready to sprout. Doesn't mean everybody else is, you know, and to have compassion, because it's just like, you know, it's many people would rather focus on sports, entertainment, Netflix, whatever it
Mhm.
is, and that's okay. I mean, I
Yeah.
saw that you posted something recently because like
Oh
it
yeah. I was
resonated
just
with
in
me.
Dallas for WrestleMania a couple weeks ago. Like, that's fine.
Yeah,
Just
well, the balance part is important too, but I think the
exactly.
priorities is like you posted on Netflix versus podcast, replace Netflix and
Oh yeah.
podcast, right? I saw that like little thread, and I just like the way you responded was exactly, to me, I think hammers in on this point, because you were basically like, it's whatever you want to do, whatever. This is basically how I see it. It wasn't rejecting any, you know, someone may see it like, what's wrong with Netflix? It's like, no, it's like, you
Yeah.
know, I saw that post as like, it's like a podcast is something that you have people who are trying to seek value, where much of Netflix, not all, and it
Right.
doesn't mean that you shouldn't enjoy a Netflix series, does has nothing to do with
Mhm.
that. It's, well, if you're focusing on podcasts, you're focused on inner growth. Most of Netflix is just escapism. How can we binge watch? How can we waste more time? Again, going back to escape. If you're consciously setting time apart to say, hey, let's watch a show, it's good.
I'm all
But
ears.
is it
Go for it.
conscious?
Yeah. And really where that comes down to, um, like if you read all the comments in there, not a single person agreed. Like
Yeah,
everybody there said no. And I was like, oh, okay, that's fine. But it's not a sense of like the right way is to say no
correct.
Netflix and go to podcasts, but it's
Yes.
like if you're sitting there and you're complaining about something about your life and you've been making the same complaints for 2, 3, 4 months, like maybe looking at changing something that you're doing because you're
Yeah.
just getting out of life what you're putting into it. So And like you said, if you're happy with where you are in life and you're down for consciously choosing Netflix, like by all means, go for it, you know?
Yeah.
Like
Because,
there's
bro, like
nothing.
5, 6 years ago or 10 years ago, I would have been that guy. I would have been like, what's wrong with Netflix? Like,
Yeah.
God, it's like the world's crazy. But now it's like, you know what the trigger I think is like it's the hunger for understanding why you're saying what you're saying. Whereas people may not be at that place yet because for me, I had to go through Netflix, porn, video games, being in a complacent state, not living to my full potential to experience enough pain to then, as through the pain, saying, "Oh, you know what? This is not where I should be. Like my soul is screaming at me."
Mhm.
But there's this part. The other part is that's justifying is, oh, I feel comfortable. The world's crazy. Let me just enjoy my Netflix. Let me enjoy my little piece of my day where I have calm and relax, but that's also a lie. It's
Right.
it's so to see when there's that resistance from other people, we're just like, oh, that's just not where they're at, and that's okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, awesome.
And really too, like I dialed that one back in a lot of cases, and we go to, you know, we're using Netflix as the example, so we can stick with that. You know, when we decide that we're just going to watch Netflix for a whole day, and it's like, okay, cool. Again, objectively, there's nothing wrong with spending an entire day watching Netflix if that's what you really want to do. But the one thing that I invite people to try is just take a second, dial back into it, and go, well, what are you doing or what are you using Netflix to not do? Like, what are you trying to escape by choosing Netflix? Like for some people, it can just be, you know what, I just worked like 6, 7, 8 days in a row straight, and I just need a break from work and everything related to that.
Yeah,
Cool, have at it. But for a lot of people, they're using Netflix because if there was no Netflix, then their mind would go crazy with all these thoughts about like, I'm not good enough, or they start thinking about all these questions around self-worth, depression can pop up, anxiety can pop up. And so Netflix becomes an anesthetic to those things. It makes it so you don't have to think about them, and then it makes it so you don't have to confront them. Well, now we're starting to run into an issue around Netflix, around your use of Netflix, right? Because now you're using it as a drug instead of as an enhancement to your life.
yeah, and I think it's the ability to put the mirror on the person because that takes away excuse me, the judgment of it, because that's really the core, because you want to be the ultimate winner is you want other people to win.
Mm-hmm.
And the way you make other people win is not by shame and guilt, which our society does, this idea,
Right.
like we were saying, the no pain, no gain, but rather to ask why in the right way, without judgment,
Yeah.
because you get people to think for themselves, like, what do you want in life? Well, you start to get to the core of what they want. They may not have a vision. They may not have a vision. Now they're just filling that time in, and then they're trying to justify their. I speak about like devil's advocate a lot. People will, when they give you resistance, they're actually trying to get to a deeper reason for why they're doing what they're doing, but they're attacking you, almost like, look, and this is where maybe we can shift into this too, is like the spirit of the father. Like, I think that is so important, because like I start to see attacks from other people trying to justify weakness, or justifying really like not being fully alive as almost a calling. Like, even like when I'm making videos and I'm giving advice, and I often say this advice is also for me, because I'm trying to understand myself. So it's almost like what the classic example when someone's like, I need some help, I need some advice about a friend. People who are ashamed to talk about themselves, right?
Yeah.
So when people are, maybe hating on you being a higher version of yourself, it's really about them. And when you really see that, it's like,
Mhm.
wow, it's like you don't take anything personally. And it's through the understanding of their motivations, why they're doing what they're doing. And the more that you are like grounded in that, the more attacks you get.
Mhm. Yeah. And yeah, I think a lot of times, like you said, with that mirror analogy, as people, yeah, there have been, I think, dozens of quotes at this point throughout history of people saying, when you're some flavor of, when you see something you hate in somebody else,
Yeah.
it's in you, and you just hate it in
It
you.
sounds so simple, but it's
Right.
really true. And
And
you
that's
have to
really what
see
it
it.
is. Yeah. And so I think a lot of those attacks come from a place of, you have that thing, I don't like it. It's not even that they know that they have it, but it's easier to attack it in someone else,
Yeah.
because then you can just say, well, that's someone else. You don't have to then confront the fact that it's also in you. because if you acknowledge that it's in you, now it's on you to do something about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just heard something. It's the letter of the word versus the spirit of the word. Because the letter of the word is I can speak all day about something, and I can post like a lot of Facebook quotes that are true, right? But when push comes to shove, a lot of times the actions aren't reflective of the words, but the actions only become reflective of the words through the deep understanding. And I guess maybe since we're talking on this, to me, I'll share my view on like, because I've really grown more into faith. And what that really means, I think, is more of logos, like it's more of logic, like supreme logic, because the more you know, to me, I was raised Catholic, and it was like the church was just there was just something that was off about it. It just wasn't, it's very similar in the extent that it was, like education, like just because to me, I think school system is corrupt, but in a school, you can find a brilliant teacher and you can learn a lot from school. Like to me, there's more value in a good teacher than just going to this school to just say, I have this degree.
Right.
So in the same way, I think church can be a good thing, but there's a lot of hypocrites in the church. There's a lot of just like, it's dogma. But to me, I've grown more into like what the idea of Christ is. And like so many of the points that we've talked about, like, for example, we started with confrontation, right? Making your yes, yeses and your no's, no's. I was always taught by like hippie version of Jesus, be nice to everybody. It's like, no, like the ability to confront hypocrisy and starting with yourself and then going into like the 40 days, 40 nights analogy of like going into the death of the ego, that depression, like you went through depression. I've gone through depression. Those are some of the best like character building experiences. And to be with that, the false bullshit that we tell ourselves is very painful. And on the other side of that, is tremendous compassion, tremendous love, and ultimately getting people to think for themselves. That's freedom within. So that some of these ideas, like I was never taught this in church. I started to understand it by just like studying Christ and studying what this means and being separated from the dogmatic part of it.
Yeah.
So enough about me. What is your view on like faith or philosophy, or what's been your journey in that?
So I had been turned off of religion for a long time because I used to wait tables, and I used to wait tables on Sunday mornings. And most of the people that are out Sunday mornings were just coming from church.
Yeah.
And the percentage of people that would come into a restaurant on a Sunday morning from a place where they were taught to love everybody and then treated the wait staff like we were below lower class citizens was so high, there is no way you could convince me that church was the place to be. And so
Sunday Christians.
I was like, wow, if that's what being Christian is like, I want nothing to do with it. Like,
Yeah.
why would anybody want to do that? And so that was my mindset for the long, long time. And it actually wasn't until I think it was either until grounding camp or maybe just a bit before that I started opening back up to it. I also went to a Catholic school when I was still in New York years and years ago. And one of my good friends is he's a devout Christian. And so we would talk here and there about Christianity, about things in the Bible. And then since grounding camp, we've been talking more and more about scripture and more about religion and faith. And he represents at least what in my head, like a good Christian would be, because he does have that loving energy about him. He does have that strong masculine energy about him. So I was like, oh, well, I can talk to him about stuff related to Jesus, related to the Bible and all that. And we've had tons of great conversations about it.
Without it being like, do you believe in Jesus? What, or do you love your Lord and Savior? It's like, there's so much like, it's like you don't get it. To me, the most real people are the ones who are not pushing shit down your throat. They get it so much that they want you to get it. And it's almost like overflowing cup,
Yeah. And he's willing to have those conversations where I'm like, well, I understand this story, but like, well, what about this scenario and this scenario and that? And he's willing to have those open conversations about disagreements within the Bible, within the faith. And I'm like, oh, okay. So really it's like between grounding camp, between guys like you, everybody else we met at grounding camp, and then, friends like him, that have been able to show me that, like, oh, you can be a strong Christian and not be a hypocrite and not be judgmental and not be covertly hateful.
Yeah.
Where now I can be like, okay, now I'm starting to more, it's like when you take a cat into a new place, some cats don't just run around all over the place right at first.
We have a couple,
And
they disappear.
yeah, a lot of times they'll disappear. And the more you try to get them out, the more they're going to dig in and just stay in the corner. But if you just take them out of the carrier and you just let them roam, they'll get to it on their own. And so that's how I'm handling faith right now. So I'm rediscovering it.
Yeah, that's so funny because like even like there's two things that stood out because it's for me the closest I got was my own inner journey on it. Not I completely agree. Just being left alone and just like thinking for myself. But there's two things that stood out for me that actually are well, three things. One is Gandhi said, "I love your Christ, but not your Christians." I love that because it's like
That's
that
fantastic.
ties into your Sunday, experience. Because just because someone goes to church doesn't make them a Christian. And then
Right.
it's like Jordan Peterson says, it's like, what do you mean by God? What do you mean by Christian, right? Do you just like, you can be college educated, but an idiot, right? So you just have some knowledge that makes you money, but that's a whole other conversation. But, there was two things that stood out. And one was, where Christ said, you read the scriptures daily, and in them you think you have life. And this, to me, he was referring to the people who were like, pushing the Bible thumpers of the time, the
Right.
hypocrites, right? Of just saying, of just like, reading the scriptures and saying, oh, look how, like, no, he was calling out hypocrites. Like he was calling out people he was confronting them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And there was another in there that says that you well, I just one branches to another. One is that you just go to people, and there's people who want to listen, they listen, and people who don't, they don't. And it's like, to me, the more Christian, it's like you don't even have to say the word Christ or it's like the second you say that, it turns people off. It's like you want to get people to be hungry for it.
Right.
Quotes like, "Man will not live by bread and bread alone, but by every word of the Holy Spirit." Right? Like to me, I decipher that as like it's like, sure, we can eat and survive, but like if we don't have sustainable value system, like, and it's all every man for himself, we're going to destroy ourselves. So we have
Right.
to have some sort of coercion there. And yeah, and then even like there's the classic example of like it's he who was without sin cast the first stone.
Mm-hmm.
Like that to me is like a brilliant example of someone who disarms people without force, right? It's
Right.
like if
Yeah.
you've never done anything wrong, go ahead, judge people.
Judge away. Yeah.
So what that does is it allows people to go within themselves, and if they're going to attack, they're going to be exposed as hypocrites. So there's like such wisdom there. Like he wasn't saying, "I'm Jesus," right? Like he's saying, no, like if you've never done anything wrong, go ahead, be the first to punish.
Yeah.
That's power. That's power. And yeah, I think a lot of the problem with the church is the guilt and shame
Yeah.
that people have through their own sin, meaning to me, ignorance. Because when people ignore their own conscience, or we go for self-gratification, we have to be, it's like we go against ourselves, and then we naturally go against other people. So then this guilt and shame, I think, gets carried into all these different things, all these different, like, it's like I saw a meme recently. It's I support the newest thing or whatever. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's our own guilt and shame gets projected onto that. Now we're part of a group, so we're caring people. Right. So, and I think institutions know that, they use that against people.
Yeah. I think that's, been the past, I don't know, at least decade. The more I think about it,
Yeah.
it's like you can find that anywhere. They're creating this constant flow of us versus them, of some
Yeah.
sort of groupism, right? Like you're either pro COVID or you're the enemy. You're either anti-COVID or you're the enemy. There's no room for
Yeah.
the middle. You're either a Republican or Democrat. And if you're the other, you're evil. There's no room for the middle. You either want to do strength training or you want to do cardio. And if you do the other, you're evil. There's no room for the middle. When
Yeah.
really, on all those fronts, the truth is probably in the middle. The truth sits somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just more, it creates more division, more identification, even in
Mm-hmm.
like the gender, like now there's like how many genders are there? And to me, it's like, I'm not going to tell anybody how to live their life, but the more that we divide people and put them into a category, the more we end up, it's the more we can be separated
Right.
rather than seeing our similarities. Like, everybody deep down wants the same thing. It's going to be expressed differently, but I feel like the
I think
ego.
everybody just wants to be seen and respected. I think that's
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
probably it for everybody.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because I've thought a lot about validation,
Yeah.
because I'm sure we're in the same camp. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like the best form of validation is within yourself, right?
Yeah.
But I've had we could maybe we talk about this a little bit. Like, what do you think about validation? Because the more I say I don't need validation from other people, and I see it in other people, it's like to me they're screaming they need validation, right? Like if I come on here and I say I don't need validation from anybody, I just need me. There's a part of ego there. So
Yeah.
it's like I want validation from people who I know have validation within themselves. That's like kind of where I've been at now, because it's like I like getting a text or a call from people that I love in my life. And like I like receiving compliments if they're real and they're
Yeah.
unexpected, they're fresh, right? Because that comes only from people who have self-love and it's coming out naturally, versus I don't want to live alone and have no love from anybody else, right? So like
Yeah.
to me, that's where I've been going into. What are your thoughts on
So
validation? And
there's a Stoic quote, and I saw it, I think maybe a few days ago. So I think it was Epictetus that said it, but don't quote me on that because I'm not
okay,
100% sure. But essentially, it was the gist of it was if you're looking for external validation, you've already compromised yourself. So
yeah,
I think there's a piece there, but I think there's more to it than what that says. So on the note of validation, I think we need to be able to validate ourselves, and we need to be able to do that first before we can accept any external validation.
yeah,
Because if we don't, then we become reliant and dependent on that external validation. That's when we
yeah,
start trying to impress people. That's when we start trying to find a group to fit into just for the sake of acceptance, just so that we can be seen and respected, right? But if we work on really just seeing and respecting ourselves, we it's not that we don't care about that from outside, but we can either take it or leave it. We can say, oh cool, that group respects us, or that group respects me, but I don't really like what they're about. Like I'm not, and so you don't feel like you have to just fall in just because they respect you, or you don't feel like, we've all seen the relationships where they're really only together because they validate each other and not
yeah,
because they're actually a good match. And they've been in that cycle of break up together, break up together, break up together. It's because when they break up, they realize, oh, I don't have any source of external validation anymore,
mm,
because they didn't have it within themselves. So
yeah,
then they get back together because the validation starts to flow both directions. And then they realize it's a terrible mix for whatever reason, and they break up, validation's missing, and the cycle just continues until it just gets bad enough that there's no choice but to just permanently end it.
yeah. I find it interesting because I think, yeah, I completely agree with you. I find that there's a lot of paradoxes that pop up as I grow internally. In other words, so going off this example, it's like to be in a relationship, you're going to be possessive of the person you're with, but at the same time not possessive.
Yeah.
So, and in the same way, like maybe a lighter example would be he who knows everything knows nothing, right? So now you're getting into these paradoxes. If I know everything, then I really know nothing, and if I know
Yeah.
nothing, I know everything. So in the same way in a relationship, like it's to walk that middle line is, so to me it's difficult, but I'm growing more into it, where it's just
hmm
like it's like, especially in my relationship, you're my woman, but you're not, like I don't own you at the
Right.
same time. And it's like, and I think that's where I'm tying it in with the validation part. I think I agree with you. I think of like the scene in 300 where it's like Leonidas is dying by his main man, and he's like, it was an honor to serve your side. It was an honor to have died at yours, or something like
Yeah.
that. He's giving this real validation. I mean, obviously that's an extreme example. But I
actually
think,
that's a good example, right? Because he
yeah,
gave all that external validation, but do you think Leonidas needed that validation to move
no,
on? Or was he
not at
already
all.
overflowing
Yeah,
with his own already?
correct. Yeah,
That's the thing right there, right? Now, obviously, he was beyond overfull with validation to the point where he was starting to get a little delusional with it, right? But
yeah,
it still paints the example where it's like you still need at least that baseline of personal validation. And that comes from being grounded. That comes from accepting yourself as you are, flaws and all, because I think we're, as a society, pushing this idea of perfectionism, which is, I think, at the root of everything that's going wrong with us right now,
yeah,
because we're not perfect and people are trying to be perfect. And then we fail at being perfect, so we become depressed because we're not perfect.
yeah.
Or we become anxious about being perfect.
Yeah. I think because I've reflected on that as well. Like the idea, because I think a lot of time into what we just talked about, the Christian thing, it's just like, well, nobody's perfect. I think again, this is where the paradox comes in again, right? Because if you say to somebody, well, nobody's perfect, you have to be careful. I think what I've learned, because this is what people have said to me, is you almost give people a pass to not be the best version of themselves, right? Because when you say to someone, it's okay, nobody's perfect, then people say, oh, you know what? Yeah, I can fuck up and, I can just keep screwing up. But at the same time, if you put that pressure on the person, then, then they'll never make mistakes and they won't grow too. So they beat themselves up. What I've learned, what I think is like people have there is a way of seeing the world that's perfect. In the same way, 2020 vision we say is perfect vision. Right now, if our vision's off a little bit, doesn't mean we're bad, we should beat ourselves up, but there's a more clear way of seeing problems in the world. And that's, going to what you were saying before, right? It's like the people you hang around with, right? The way they see the world is going to impact how you see the world.
Right.
So if you're hanging around people who are poor influences and you're not, and I think this is the key part with the validation, all these things tying together, is radical honesty within yourself. If you have any sense of hypocrisy within yourself, and this can tie into all the other things we were talking about, right? Like if you're not honest with yourself with a workout, like you're only hurt, you're be honest with yourself with your workouts. Push yourself to the
Yeah.
point where you're not killing yourself, but radical honesty, like I really gave it my all and I'm cool with that.
Yeah. And that's what I love about strength training, about, deadlifting is one of my favorite exercises. That's what I love about the deadlift. The deadlift, and really it's any exercise, but the deadlift is super radically honest. You either did the work to prepare to lift the weight or you didn't. That's it. Like you can say, well, I had 400 pounds on the barbell. I did all the work to get ready for it and I still didn't pull it. So then it's like, well, did you do all the work? Are you sleeping well? Are you eating well? Has all your training up till now been where it should have been? Because apparently not. Like maybe just digging a little bit deeper. And the other thing, you talked about pushing to be perfectionism and being perfect in everything you do. Strength training is a great analogy for that too, right? Because you can be imperfect and still make great progress. Like you don't have to be perfect in every workout with every
I
rep
think
in
it
every
depends how you
set.
define perfect, right? Because I think
Exactly.
being
Yeah.
perfect is the ability to make mistakes. It's like, great, I
Exactly. Yeah.
screwed up and that's
Yeah.
perfect, right? So it's the definition of it, but
But
not
we've
perfect in the
but
sense of
we've learned
ego.
perfect means 100%, and
Yes.
that's the
Yes.
damaging one. That's the damaging part.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree. So, I mean, going here like a little over an hour. Is there anything else you wanted to talk on? I mean, maybe one of the things I always talk about with like why I made this channel in part is just to help people who are really suffering. Because for me, I made a podcast. I'm sure in part it's why you did, is like to help other people. I can't tell you how many podcasts of Joe Rogan. I've been listening to someone PBD recently, Valuetainment. Like these people who are really sharing their stories and their lives, that like we could be saving a life, right? If like we have these real conversations, people who are going through depression or overweight. What advice would you give to somebody who is really overweight, or someone who's like, this sounds really good, but I'm so far gone. I have injuries, whatever the excuse the mind will make. What would you say to those people who really like, they need that, like that thing to tell them like, you know what? No, I can do this.
So 2 pieces for that. First piece is just start. Just pick one choice. It doesn't matter how small the choice is, but just make one
But
choice.
Tony, I don't have a gym membership. What can I do? Where do I start? What's the first thing I do?
Go walk around a park. If you can't walk around a park because you're just in a bad neighborhood or it's cold, it's snowing, it's raining, go walk around your house. Go, just do 5-10 minutes of walking around your house where you don't sit down, you don't stop, you're just pacing back and forth. If you are trying to make dietary changes, just add in 1 bottle of water a day. Just add in 1 salad. Just add 1 thing, and then get good at that 1 thing, and then add a second thing.
Yeah.
And
And what
then,
about taking things out? What should people take out to start? Because that might be a good thing as well, right? Like cutting out.
so it's almost sneaky the way that I tell people about that, because I don't tell people to subtract things.
Okay.
Because if I tell you don't eat a donut, what is the very first thing you're going to think
I
about?
want to eat a donut. Yeah.
You want to eat a
Got you.
donut.
Got you.
But when I say
And
just add protein in every meal, just add water, just add fruits and veggies, what are you thinking about? Everything I just
yeah,
listed off.
correct.
What are you not thinking about? You're not thinking about the donut that we didn't even bring up.
Gotcha.
Then naturally those things are going to come in and they're just going to edge the donut out.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
So yeah, focus on just adding more good, and they'll just take the place of the bad. Because the universe works in balance. You can't take something out without adding something in. Otherwise, something else is just going to take that place,
Yeah.
right?
Nature
You're
occurs in
basically creating a
vacuum.
vacuum. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So, and it's more mental work to say, take out a donut, add in an apple, because now you're making 2 decisions. You're choosing to get rid of the donut and to add an apple. But if you just say add an apple, or add something else that you want to add in place, that's, right there, that's half the work, because you're just making 1 choice.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Yeah. Eddie, if you wanted to plug your information again, where people can find you, and I know you're on Facebook too. People can follow you there. Instagram, I'm not sure if you're on there. So
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Tony Davis Coaching on both of those. Again, liftingwithtony.com is a website we pulled up earlier. If you go there, liftingwithtony.com/neurotype, you can take that neurotype test for free. And we can get you that info for, how to structure nutrition, how to structure training, if you're also training, to optimize for the way your mind works, so you can work with your mind instead of against it. And if you are on a health journey and you're looking for more positive voices around you, like we talked about before, having more positive voices around you is better than having negative ones. You can listen and subscribe to my podcast. It's the Bearded Barbell Podcast. That's on Apple, it's on Google, Amazon, Spotify, all the big hitters there. And I've also got a group on Facebook. You can join there as well. If you type in macros, mindset, and metabolism for fat loss, will pop right up. You can jump into that group. It's also 100% free, and we'd love to have you there as well.
awesome. Thanks, Tony. I appreciate you, bro.
You got it, man. You have a great day. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, my pleasure.